Presenters will be Alexandra, Maurtua, Konstantinidi, and Paige Kelly. Alexandra is co-founder and director at the Livelihood Collab. She's a livelihood specialist with nearly 20 years of international experience, helping organizations design and implement strategies that integrate social performance with environmental resilience. She's finalizing an MA in Development Studies and Diplomacy at UPeace Unitar, and she remains actively involved in both international professional networks and local conservation efforts in South Africa. Paige Kelly is also co-founder and director at the Livelihood Collab. She's an environmental and social consultant with over 10 years of international experience supporting organizations to navigate complex social and environmental challenges through practical, context-sensitive, and people-centered approaches. Trained in environmental science, Paige specializes in social impact assessments, livelihood restoration, resettlement planning, stakeholder engagement, and social due diligence across sectors, including mining, renewable energy, oil and gas, telecomunications, and agriculture. And with that, I will pass it over to Alexandra and Paige to get us started. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Susannah. We'll be just sharing a presentation. Is it visible? I just want to confirm before I start.
Yeah, so sorry, one moment. I don't know what's happening.
Should I go ahead and share from my side, perhaps? I can do that.
Yeah, sure. If you want to share it from yours for this one while I figure out what's happening on my end.
Let's see.
One sec. Oh, there we go. Mara, looks like it's working.
Yeah, sorry for the delay.
No worries.
Perfect.
Okay, great. Well, good day, everyone. I'm Paige Kelly, and this is Alexandra Maurtua Konstantinidi. We are from the Livelihood Collab. As social scientists, we often find ourselves working alongside environmental specialists, engineers, financiers, and policy practitioners. Our role is to understand how project decisions are experienced by people and communities, particularly in contexts where livelihoods, governance, and conflict dynamics are already under pressure. Today, we'll be exploring how critical mineral projects navigate uncertainty in fragile and conflict-affected contexts, and why context-sensitive approaches are essential for protecting livelihoods, supporting peace, and strengthening the social foundations of a just transition. We can move to the next slide. Thank you.
We can go back up to
For many
the slide.
critical mineral
There we go.
Yeah. For many critical mineral projects in Africa, planning looks like this bridge in the fog. Investments are announced, then delayed, designs are reworked, licenses are contested, years go by in a state of maybe. International frameworks offer powerful language on equity, justice, and responsible mining, but they often assume that projects move forward in relatively orderly ways, where institutions functions, designs are clear, and peace is stable. Our starting point is that this gap between linear planning and uncertain project realities has consequences for people, livelihoods, and the environment. We can move on to the next slide, Mira. Thank you. Yet too often context is treated as background noise. Our work starts from the opposite direction. We begin with the cracks, histories of droughts and hunger, forced displacement, civil unrest, and weak governance that shape how new projects are received in Africa. Even when a project is delayed, it's redesigned or suspended, people still have to live, farm, fetch water, raise children, negotiate with companies, and build climate resilience. This is why uncertainty itself becomes a social risk. For us, context sensitive is not a buzzword. It means reading those fractures carefully and accepting that the same international principles will play out very differently in Kolwezi, in Cabo Delgado, or in the Great Lake regions. We can move on. Okay. We can move to the next slide, please, Mira. Sorry, thank you. Okay. I'll get going though. We also come from a grounded understanding that livelihoods depend on water, land, grazing, artisanal mining, and strong social networks. When projects stall or shift, these local subsistence economies often absorb the shock first. Today, we focus on critical mineral projects being planned in context of fragile or unfinished peace, where project uncertainty is not just another operational risk, but a peace-building challenge. We will also, today we will focus on, we will also address essential mission and existing frameworks and tools today, how they're limited guidance for projects, communities, and states, and how to deal directly with conflict in African projects context. You can stay on this slide, Mira. I'm going to hand over to Alex now.
That's wonderful. Thank you. So that's our introduction to the topic for today, and a little bit setting the scene in the African context. Although we can say that we can relate in other contexts as well. But this is where we start, with the acknowledgement that international frameworks put equity and justice at the heart of the energy transition, where critical minerals are needed. So critical minerals are mined in 31 of 54 countries in the African continent, and the Global Atlas of Environmental Justice shows us that mining-related conflicts in Africa are widespread and often tied to land access, water pollution, displacement, violence against offenders, and control over mineral-rich territories. So this is not minor for a strong word such as justice, environmental justice. At least 8 countries of the African continent account each for 10% of the global production of a given critical mineral. This is huge, and yet we're still accounting for it in economic terms. So they barely acknowledge that many critical mineral projects are already unfolding in active or fragile conflict-affected settings while navigating their own uncertainties. You can move to the next slide, Mara. So we would like to unpack actually this fact that the frameworks don't always understand that projects are already struggling to survive, to progress, to be approved. So we can move on to the next one as well. So we would like to today introduce you to this framework that we're talking about. Thank you, Mara. We can move on to the next slide. So this framework, first of all, was it's a summary of key regulatory and policy initiatives that are shaping the transitional minerals agenda in Africa. So we would like to acknowledge the Danish Institute of Human Rights that recently has published an explainer. And this explainer helps key stakeholders involved in the critical minerals sector, inclusive of the civil society and the communities, to understand what is in the international and national sphere of regulatory and policy. So looking into this, it was an eye-opener in terms of human rights, because the Danish Institute of Human Rights is putting an accent on understanding how well is this framework actually addressing human rights. And we would like to bring another additional lens, is how well are these frameworks addressing conflict. So we look at from more like a macro to a micro level. We will see that the United Nations Secretary General on Critical Energy Transitional Minerals provides an overarching umbrella, and it provides guiding to the member states this agenda, so they can implement, in developing countries, policies that will shape, the transition and environmental justice. The second one will be the African Union, will brings 4 pillars, and this is in 2025: advancing mineral development, developing human and technology capability, building a strategy value chains, and promoting prudent mineral stewardship. So this, the contribution, it's mostly for promoting the regional development at all levels. They also address human rights, but very little in the conflict language or partnership, which is really interesting, big alliance. And there's no African government that is present in this alliance. This is mostly about economic benefits, yet they have an emphasis on human rights and stewardship, which is really good to consider. But then lastly, we see the European Union that actually has several regulations in place where they actually are more focused on the European compliance for importers. So looking at this, then we go down to the actual regulation in each country, and then we looked that we still have some gaps in terms of the conflict theme. So what we've got in this framework is basically then a focus on SLO principles and policies, human rights protection, environmental sustainability. These instruments embed responsible business conduct, and they also promote multi-stakeholder dialogue, ESG safeguards, and just transition language in every key level. We move on to the next one, and then we will see that there is what is missing here is, they largely assume that relatively orderly governance environmental context, where projects are actually facing a lot more complexity in terms of permitting and in terms of implementation. None of these instruments really grapples with the day-to-day realities of projects in a fragile or active conflict setting. And this is very, very important for projects in the just transition to move forward. There's no detailed or practice-oriented solutions for companies and states to navigate these risks. And the generic human rights due diligence or traceability and stakeholder engagement expectations are not really linked to conflict resolution. So we can move on to the next one. And so we will look at a little bit of understanding what does this look like in an example, but we'll quickly move on to see what is actually needed to improve this framework for all the projects out there and the critical mineral sector.
So to ground this discussion, we use the cobalt sector in the DRC of artisanal mining as a useful example for our presentation today. It shows how the global narratives can raise important concerns that also flatten the realities of people whose livelihoods depend on artisanal mining. Labels such as blood cobalt can oversimplify the realities of artisanal mining in the DRC. While serious human rights concerns remain, artisanal mining also provides a critical source of income for thousands of households. A roadmap already exists for improving safety, strengthening governance, and protecting rights, but implementation still remains uneven. Accountability is often seen as being weak, and existing frameworks provide limited guidance on how to navigate these challenges in practice. So the challenge is therefore not simply compliance, but rather turning commitments into meaningful outcomes for people and for communities. We can move on to the next slide, Mira. Thank you. Okay, so this diagram, an OECD diagram, it shows us the operational reality of minerals moving through conflict-affected and high-risk areas. On the left, you can see artisanal and small-scale mining and large-scale mining entering the supply chain. From there, minerals move through traders, refiners, exporters, manufacturers, and ultimately into global markets. What this shows is that risk is not located in one place. It can enter at different points along the chain through armed groups, security forces, weak traceability, corruption, poor due diligence, or informal trading routes. We're showing this because it makes the operating context visible. Critical mineral projects are not only technical or commercial projects. They sit with complex systems of people, power, livelihoods, and risks. The legend is also really useful here because it distinguishes between risks of people and the risks to responsible business conduct. Building on that, the next slide looks at how project uncertainty creates risk for both companies and communities. So if we can just move on to that next slide. So what we often see and are showing here is that in practice, projects and communities experience the same risks very differently. We have seen too often the delayed investment the decision be viewed as a commercial challenge by a company, but as a livelihood challenge by a household waiting for compensation, employment, or access to replacement land. It looks different. A context-sensitive approach helps us understand these different experiences of risk and identify where they intersect. So it allows us to shift the conversation from managing a project's risks alone to understanding how uncertainty affects people, relationships, and local stability. In our experience, one of the most effective responses is not always a large intervention. Sometimes it is a series of short-term actions that directly address emerging drivers of conflict. Maintaining communication during delays, supporting vulnerable households, resolving land access concerns, or continuing engagement even when a project has paused or is on hold can help prevent uncertainty from escalating into grievance or into conflict. We can move to the next slide.
So I think here we will just maybe brush through it quickly, but through project uncertainties, what we can see is that they can convert themselves into a conflict driver if they're not managed. So let's move on to the next one. But so just to wrap up on a final thought. So basically what we're trying to say is that if we continue business as usual through normal ESG practice, and considering that the framework is not supporting this conflict resolution or prevention language, we need to move from principle to practice. We need to be more proactive to actually understand the drivers of conflict. So let's move on to the last one, Mara, or the next one. I think it's one more. Yeah, so with this one, we just would like to close off so we're not off time, but basically navigating uncertainties through context-sensitive practice, it's possible. It is something that projects need to consider to just enhance the ESG practice. We're looking at a lot more understanding practitioners and decision makers, understanding conflict, the theory of conflict, understanding what are the drivers and what are the possibilities to deactivate or actually escalate the conflict if no action is taken. So here is a set of recommendations that are included in terms of ESG, prevent the escalation of conflict, move from reactive responses to prevention by supporting institutionalized engagement, and then conflict resolution actions in mining projects must include a livelihood-sensitive approach to address the underlying drivers of conflict. And here what we would like to say is that we need to remember people come from a past and a history, and moving on to a development projects they come with trauma, project-induced trauma or conflict-induced trauma, and jumping into a new challenge, it could be difficult. So we would like to bring that language into this, and maybe just moving on to the last slide, it's just a comment to say that we need those frameworks to start addressing the language of conflict and enforce at a state, community, and project level the understanding of the reality of conflict to de-escalate, deactivate, or maintain that peace. I don't know, Myra, if we can go to the next slide. I think it's basically our last comment here is that critical mineral projects need that framework that builds a pathway to prevent and resolve conflict if they're pursuing environmental sustainability. So with this, we just would like to say thank you. And I think you've got one more slide to actually show just our contact details. And we look forward to some questions. And thank you so much for listening.
Great. Thanks so much, Paige and Alexandra. So for our next presentation, we'll move over to Europe. Our presenter is Mattia Frasca. Mattia holds a master's degree in comparative international relations and a joint master's degree in EU trade and climate diplomacy. He currently works as a junior policy officer at the Italian Sustainable Investment Forum and serves as project officer for resource justice at Generation Climate Europe, focusing on the implementation and impacts of the EU Critical Raw Minerals Act. He previously worked at the EU delegation to the Council of Europe, where he followed human rights, democracy, and environmental governance dossiers, and at the Venice Sustainability Foundation. So with that, I will pass it over to Mattia.
Thank you very much, Susannah. Thank you. And good day, everyone. So I will wait just a second for the slides as well. Great. Thank you again. And so as you can see from this first slide, my presentation is titled Resisting Green Colonialism, Some Illegal Mobilization and the Struggle for a Just Energy Transition. And it is based on research that I conducted for my master thesis. So moving right on with the next slide, the starting point of this research is a contradiction that has become increasingly visible in recent years. So as global demand for renewable energy and critical minerals accelerates, indigenous territories are increasingly targeted for wind farms, mining projects, and energy infrastructure developed in the name of sustainability. Yet these projects often overlap with territories that are essential not only economically, but also culturally, politically, and spiritually for indigenous communities. In the European and Nordic context, Sami communities have mobilized against wind energy and mineral exploration projects affecting reindeer herding territories. My research in particular focuses, as you can see, on three case studies: the Fusen and Kalvatnan wind farms projects in Norway, and the Latas 1 mineral exploration project in Finland. And methodologically, I adopted a qualitative comparative approach based on court rulings, administrative decisions, UN treaty body findings, NGO reports, and academic literature. The central question guiding the research is not simply whether indigenous rights are recognized. Rather, it is how states operationalize those rights when they come into tension with strategic energy and resource priorities. So let me introduce the three cases, and we move on with the next slide, which focuses on the first two cases in Norway. The first one is Fusen. It is the Fusen wind farms were constructed on reindeer herding territories traditionally used by South Sami communities, and became one of the largest onshore wind projects in Europe. In 2021, the Norwegian Supreme Court unanimously ruled that the project violated Article 27 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, because the wind farms endangered the cultural survival of the affected Sami communities. The court specifically rejected the argument that mitigation measures, such as supplementary winter feeding, were sufficient, because they departed substantially from traditional practices and they lacked a robust impact assessment. However, despite the ruling, the turbines remained operational, and the Norwegian government eventually pursued mediation and compensation measures rather than dismantling the infrastructure. The second case is Kalfatnan, and like Fosen, it involved a wind project affecting South Sami reindeer herding territories again, but unlike Fosen, the project never reached construction. In 2016, the Norwegian Ministry of Petroleum and Energy concluded that the project risked violating Sami cultural rights, again under Article 27 of the International Covenant, and also under the ILO Convention 169. I'll come back to this, but now we move on to the next slide with the third case, which is the latest one case in Finland. And this case is particularly relevant to today's panel because it concerns mineral exploration. So I'll focus on this a little bit more. The project was located in the Kasivarsi region of Finnish Lapland, in an area used for Sami reindeer herding. And it forms part of a broader European context in which critical raw materials such as cobalt, nickel, and lithium have become more and more important for battery production and, as we have said, for renewable technologies. This project was initiated by a private exploration company with a state-issued permit to conduct geological surveys. And the conflict emerged because exploration permits were granted with what Sami communities considered insufficient consultation, particularly regarding free, prior, and informed consent. Finnish authorities, on the other hand, argued that exploratory drilling did not constitute sufficiently significant impact to trigger stronger consultation obligations under domestic law, which is the Mining Act in Finland. This interpretation was later challenged by international human rights bodies. In particular, the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights concluded that Finland had violated Sami cultural rights and self-determination. And the Committee on the Rights of the Child found violations relating to identity, participation, and cultural continuity. Particularly significant was its characterization of this dispute as a case of intersectional discrimination involving 3 young Sami sisters coming from a multi-generational reindeer herding family. Moreover, the Finnish authorities ignored how exploration activities like dust, seismic vibrations, noise had already begun altering reindeer behavior and undermining ecological knowledge systems developed over generations. And none of this was reflected in the geological impact assessments. So what happened? In 2023, the Finnish Ministry of Economic Affairs and Employment initiated a review of the Mining Act, partly in response to indigenous advocacy and growing scrutiny of Finland's mineral governance framework. Among the proposals discussed were stronger consultation procedures and greater consideration of cumulative impacts, but no formal inclusion of veto rights or binding free, prior, and informed consent standards were introduced. The Mining Act and related environmental laws provide broad leeway to authorities in determining whether indigenous consultation is necessary. And in practice, as we have seen, this discretion is exercised in a way that prioritizes resource extraction. In fact, the exploration license for the latest one case was never fundamentally revoked. However, more recently in June 2025, the Geological Survey of Finland announced that it would not continue research activities in the Lataseno area, and it did not seek an extension of the exploration permit. So at a first glance, these may seem like 3 separate cases. However, the comparison reveals broader patterns. And moving on with the slides, thank you. The first central argument of the research is that compliance should not be understood as a simple binary distinction between implementation and non-implementation. Instead, these cases reveal 3 distinct compliance patterns. So Kalvatnan represents preventive compliance. Rights concerns were integrated into decision-making before harm occurred. Fusen represents compensated non-compliance. Rights were recognized through a landmark judicial ruling, yet implementation remained incomplete and compensation became a substitute for structural change. And finally, LATAS represents symbolic compliance. Rights violations were acknowledged by international institutions, but domestic governance practices remain largely unchanged. The second finding concerns political economy. The comparison suggests that outcomes are shaped not only by legal norms, but also by the strategic value attached to the projects. And here, Fusen and Kalvatnan are particularly revealing because both involved Sami reindeer herding territories, both relied on similar rights frameworks, both involved Norway, and yet they produced very different outcomes. One important difference is that Fusen became a flagship renewable energy project with substantial political visibility, economic investment, strategic importance, especially due to the geopolitical context of the Russian aggression against Ukraine and the energy crisis following that. Kalvatnan, on the other hand, carried considerably lower political and financial stakes. Similarly, LATAS 1 dispute unfolded within a broader context, like I already said, in which critical raw materials are increasingly framed as strategic assets. They are necessary for decarbonization, for industrial competitiveness, and energy security. So, as I already said, and it is clear from these cases, the comparison suggests that the greater the strategic value attached to a project, the greater the pressure on states to reinterpret, minimize, or postpone the implementation of indigenous rights obligations. Moving on to the next slide, thank you. Another finding of the research concerns the broader effects of legal mobilization. In all three cases, litigation functioned not only as a legal strategy, but as a political one. Even where legal victories remained limited, mobilization generated public scrutiny, policy debate, reputational pressures, and in some instances, even practical consequences for project development. And the June 25 decision in the LATAS case not to extend exploration activities illustrates that legal mobilization may influence outcomes even without producing a formal governance reform. To conclude, and we move to my last slide, the research suggests that the green transition can reproduce extractive power dynamics when indigenous consent and participation are sidelined. These Sami cases demonstrate that legal mobilization can generate recognition, visibility, and political pressure, but at the same time, they reveal how differently states operationalize indigenous rights when they come into tension with strategic energy and resource priorities. So ultimately, climate governance cannot be considered fully sustainable if it fails to incorporate rights-based, participatory, and conflict-sensitive approaches to energy and resource governance. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Mattia. We're now going to head over to our next presentation in Argentina. Our presenter is Antonella Lemos. Antonella is a licensed attorney in Argentina and Fulbright Scholar with a Master of Laws in Environmental Law from the George Washington University Law Schools. She has over 6 years of legal experience in legislative advising, public policy, and human rights. So, Antonella, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I hope you are doing well. Well, my presentation is about Argentina, my country. I had the opportunity to do this research during my master degree. And so during that course, we have the opportunity to see the intersection between human rights and environmental protection. And so this is the result of my research. And yeah, we will see it now. Well, I think I already answered the first question, how I ended up here. And I like to think about these questions for the people looking at the presentation and how difficult it is to try to think about environmental issues in this context. For us in Argentina, we have a huge relation with the US, so it's important to see what is going on in the whole region, and so how play the government decisions from one country to another. And what that is mean to study these issues today, where everything is driven by the monetization, and think about human rights. So next slide, please. Well, lithium mining in Argentina represents a huge economic promise. A huge part of the country believe that this could help to the economic crisis that we are suffering for a long time period, actually. But at the same time, there is a huge tension with human rights claim. The question is, can Argentina manage lithium in the way that balance development and human rights? And of course, the answer is this is a political decision. And we have democracy in our country, but at the same time, we have this stage from one government to another, and we are changing most of the time legislation, so we don't have a certainty in the answer. So the objective in my research is try to explore the intersection of economic opportunity, human rights protection, and the legal framework that I will spotlight this, but Argentina has a strong legal framework that sadly we don't look too much. So next slide, please. Well, the factual background about this is that Argentina is part of the Lithium Triangle. Lithium is a mineral very important for the energy transition. Argentina is part of that triangle with Bolivia and Chile. And Argentina has almost 6 states where lithium is located: Jujuy, Salta, Catamarca, La Rioja, and San Juan. These are the major producers of lithium. And we have like brine reserves in Hombre Muerto, Olaroz, y Cauchari. These are the main brines in Argentina. And one important thing about Argentina process of lithium mining is that it's very different from other countries because we have the brines here, and this process is through evaporation. This is important because I think here we have the main issue with human rights claims. This process during this process, we need a lot of water. So this is one of the main claims that human rights defenders claim during the process of the lithium mining. One important thing is like the main buyers from Argentina are China, Germany, and the US. And an important thing to add here is that Argentina sell the raw material, and so we have very little profit from this. And so as we think about it from the beginning, it's like we were thinking about the lithium mining as something that could help the economic crisis, but at the end, the main profit is from the battery. And so we don't develop battery in the country. And so that is like a huge problem in industry for us. Well, here, if we see economic and environmental dimensions, we can see that lithium represents like this economic promise. We call it here in the country the white gold because the characteristic the mineral has is key for the energy transition. Everything today is driven by lithium batteries. And so the potential to attract foreign investment is huge for Argentina governments. Every government that is coming to power actually relies a lot of the natural resources we have. And this one that is critical minerals are very important. And so this is like the huge, the fate that many governments have. But sadly, the problem is in decision making. And so at the same time, we have environmental and social concerns. As I said before, we need a lot of water to produce to this process in the lithium mining because of the brine characteristic that lithium here in Argentina has. And at the same time, we have the use of this huge amount of water in an arid region, as we see in that place in the Legion Triangle, and that is a very arid region, and so it's almost a desert. So the use of huge amount of water there is very contradictory, and this contradiction alters the ecosystem. So we see like flora and fauna are very damaged in this region. Particularly, there is a kind of flamingo, a specific species that is suffering from this disruption in their ecosystem. During my research, I had the opportunity to see and to evaluate this, and this is one of the things that researchers and scientists are claiming to, that it's not only about all the things or human rights claim that we can bring, but also like the whole ecosystem is suffering from these kind of activities in this particular region. And so at the same time, we see, well, the result of this is contamination and the impact in indigenous livelihoods. So I would like to say here that not all the people, usually when they visit Argentina, can see how big the country is. In this region live a lot of indigenous people, and usually they live from the tourism or the salt production. So if we take from them the land, it's danger actually their livelihood. So it is a huge problem. And in addition, one of the main problems of this is like we don't have like certain information, like the development of the data about these issues is mostly from, for example, the USGS and international organizations' information, because one of the main problems is that we don't have like the government here in Argentina, and because of the lack of investment too, we don't have the possibility to develop our own data. So this is something that is very critical to understand what is going on in the land, and therefore create some frameworks that represent exactly what we need. Next slide, please. So as we see, as we say previously, the legal framework in Argentina actually is a very strong legal framework. So we recognize a healthy environment for the people in the national constitution, which is a very strong rule. We give the control of the natural resources to the province. We have a General Environmental Protection Act, and actually the province, they guarantee the same rights in their own constitution. So we have a very strong framework, and in addition, we are bound by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights standards. So we shouldn't have these problems, but we have. And so this is because actually we are not seeing the legal framework, the very strong legal framework we have. Next slide, please. So this is the result of not complying with that legal framework, actually. So indigenous community actually hold a communal property rights over ancestral lands. They request the legal requirement for free, prior, informed consent, as we have seen before. This is a right that they have. That is not only that they are not only because of the landmark cases, but also because we recognize in our constitution. And actually, last year, the Jujuy Supreme Court, one of the province Supreme Courts, upheld right of local communities to public environmental information, something that I said before, we don't have that information available for communities and the people. So this is a huge problem and create these conflicts. Next slide, please. I wanted to bring here Rigi, which is this is the last rule that the government has created for Argentina. Last year and this year they have a new version. Is super rigid. This RIGI actually is the regime for incentivizing investment and export generation. This rule is actually very economic driven, so attracts large scale foreign investments through tax and financial incentives, prioritize economic growth and export. Most of the projects that were approved so far are for mining related. And I was reading and I wanted to bring here this kind of projects and rules because this specific rule that bring fade hope for an economic development in the country doesn't say anything about lack of, so these rules don't have anything about environmental and social safeguards. So one of the main question is how we develop economic without a perspective in sustainable development. And this is like a clear rule that don't have anything about with related to environmental and social issues. They don't prevent any of these future conflicts. The next slide, please. And so in my proposal, what I was trying to bring in this research is like develop a specific legal framework for critical minerals is needed in the country. Promote local lithium battery industry will be a challenge, but something better if we want to think about economic development. Ensure indigenous participation in decision making is needed, and we must we need to do it if we want to know exactly what is going on in the land, provide fair rules. And of course, invest in scientific research and environmental data transparency is clear. Like we need this kind of things and think about it and impose it if we want to produce laws and rules that are for the people actually. The next slide, please. And so I bring a question here and says like Argentina holds a strategic role in the global energy transition, but what is the position about energy transition today in Argentina, but in the world? I repeat some issues here. True development requires respect for international human rights, scientific development and information, sustainable management of natural resources, and shared benefit for local communities who are the most impacted by these kind of activities at the end of the day. So I think with this, I conclude my presentation, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Antonella. And now we'll conclude our whirlwind tour of the globe by heading over to Thailand for our last presentation. Our presenters will be Jirajade, Wisetdonwail, and Simon Kaack. Jirajade is a human rights defender and policy researcher with more than 5 years of experience working alongside grassroots movements for gender, land, and environmental justice, with a particular focus on women-led resistance against extractive industries in Northeast Thailand. She serves as a program management officer at Radical Grandma Collective, supporting communities organizing for land defense against extractive industries, the restoration of socio-cultural relationships and ecosystems, and the connection of global allies to local struggles in Thailand. Simon is a doctoral fellow at the University of Bath. His professional record features, among others, climate education program development in Cambodia, facilitation of sustainable transport cooperation at the United Nations Escape in Bangkok, and environmental governance analysis for the German Institute for Global and Area Studies in Hamburg. So I'll pass it over to Jirajade and Simon, and then after that, we will open up for discussion. So please feel free to submit to the Q&A. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Okay. Yeah, today me and Simon will present you potash policies, community exclusion and extractive governance in Isan, Thailand. On this study, we will examine the potash mining conflict in Isan through the intersectional lens of executive governance and environmental peace building. Yeah, to give you some context, Isan is a Thailand northeastern regions. It's largely agriculture with rural communities. Uh, in Isan region, we have issue about soil. In the surface, we have a very sandy soil, but underground we have a lot of minerals, include potash. Since in the 1960, potash extraction has been promoted by Thai state as a national economic priorities in a way to reduce fertilizer import. And by 2015, mining concessions had been granted across 3 provinces in Isan, which is Udon Thani, Chayapum, and Nakhon Ratchasima, which is our case study. This area is the only company that have begun actual extractions. The operations begin in 2016. The leakage from the companies contaminate groundwater and rice fields, and is turned fertile land to the land that not produce a rice, and also the livestock have been affected by this contaminate too. So I will hand over to Simon, who will discuss about research question and method.
Yeah, thanks very much, Maprang. So we can stay on this slide for a second, just to give you an overview of guiding motives and methodologies and theories that are accompanying us throughout this research journey. So we started with a very inductive, open-ended approach to assume this research. So we just wanted to know, first of all, how state and corporate actors are framing the extraction of potash in northeastern Thailand. And then secondly, also how communities are perceiving this, and as a result, how they are resisting these developments. And so we are trying to have a very broad overview on social impacts, environmental impacts, but also political impacts that are Isan communities facing in this regard. And we also try to see if environmental peace building as a concept can offer pathways here for resolution of these conflicts. For that, we have 2 sort of main approaches that we're applying. One is an overview over the governmental and corporate documents that have been put out in relation to potash mining in Isan. And we try to analyze these with a qualitative content analysis, so trying to capture different elements within these documents and trying to categorize them to come up with overarching frames that are guiding the argumentation in these documents. And then secondly, the community aspect is covered with semi-structured interviews that we have led and are still leading with villagers, community leaders, and activists. Next slide, please. Right, so the theoretical framework is also quite broad that we are applying here. So we try to look on the issue through a lens of political ecology, and we try to operationalize mining as a site of power, conflict, and resistance. And we rely here on the 2021 special issue published in International Affairs, which was, or the introduction to the special issue was authored by Ida et al. And they look at environmental peace building through a threefold lens, that is security, livelihoods, and economy, and politics and social relations. So we try to have this framework as a lens that is guiding us through the research. We try to cover these dimensions not only in this presentation, but then later also in the text-based output. Next slide, please. To start you off with the governmental context of general extractive resource governance in Thailand, the guiding policy document that we are looking at here is the Mineral Act that was set into law in 2017. And if you look at the Mineral Act in detail, there's quite a few narratives that are promoting quick permissions, and at the same time reduce public participation in granting mining licenses. And environmental oversight here is quite weak as well. So it's very much following a neoliberal model that has been applied in other contexts as well that we heard about earlier today. And land is very much seen as well as water as a commodity that can be sold. And so here we can see a close interplay of both corporate interests along with state motives and state governance when it comes to these extraction sites. And local and community voices are included to a certain extent, but they're not central to this document. Next slide, please. Yeah, I head over to Maprang again.
Yeah, our first finding is about a livelihood collapse. It begins with the saline contaminations on villager rice fields, and also it contaminates the underground water, so like it make water is undrinkable. Um, the 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 effect of this contamination is can cause the families that who own the lands, but now they have to rent lend the land from other farm to cultivate the rice, and also creates a lot of negative death in villagers. So it's in our interview they said that this kind of the act that company let the saline contamination is the act of land grabbings. So a lot of villagers they lose their land and can produce their rice or can provide the livelihood. And next slide, please. Our second findings is about state representation and corporate impunities. In the original EIAs, the state didn't allow company to use the explosives, but in somehow the company used the local governance mechanisms to secretly use it, and the villager didn't know that before, and the contaminate is being worse after they use exploitive. Another thing that can prove that state repression is when community members present the evidence of contaminations like photograph or a soil sample or saline test, the government officials they demand community to prove that the damage come from the mine. So the burden of proof was placed on the communities. They have to figure it out how to prove that by their own. And this is the biggest cost that villager and community have to take. And it's really hard to community to push back or to push back and to submit their demand to recovery their land. And next slide, please. Yeah, our another finding is about resistance and resilience in communities. The community tried the way to fight back. So first they submitted the petitions at every level of governance, from local administrative and to provincial office and to Ministry of Industry. They have also engaged parliament mechanisms like PM's, Senate or oversight committees, but none of these effort have been like didn't produce any resolutions for the villagers. And another thing is they always demand about transparencies and also the rule of law that local governance they refuse to use that, and they get away from that responsibilities. And their ultimate goal is to the mine close, and they want to push restoration plan by using a local governance mechanisms. So for their resistance, they conclude policy recommendations. Can we go to next slide?
I can take this one, Mattia. So just to make an attempt to reconcile with the earlier dimension of environmental peace building, so security, livelihoods, and politics. It's very premature, but what we can see here so far is that all these three dimensions are basically failed by the current governmental approach to potash mining in Isan. So it's very top-down technocratic governance, and this also has to do with the overall Thai state, how it functions, and the entanglement between government and corporate actors. However, we can also see that there are lawyers and there are broader interests groups outside of civil society that is directly concerned by the mining side that are taking action on this. So there are petitions filed, as Maprang just explained, and there is resistance happening. So opportunities for pursuing environmental peace building in that regard exist. However, this would need much more participative approaches and obviously free, prior, and informed consent, which leads us to our policy recommendations.
Yeah, for the policy recommendations, the first is about participatory impact assessment. Villagers want to lead monitoring to rebalance power and ensure accountability from local government and also from the state. Another thing is about legal reform, about strategic lawsuits against public participants or slabs that company use this strategy to cut off the power of the communities, and this slab can draw the power of people, and it make a movement of people weak. So it's push more costs that community have to take in order to fight for their lands. Another policy recommendation is about holistic resolutions that community want to do in order to want the state to take accountability for what they lose. And our last policy recommendation is about the state have to take alternative development in order to develop their policy on Isan area. Okay.
I think we still have our, oh yeah, that's the conclusion, but yeah.
Yeah, so we still have time, right?
Yeah, go ahead and finish the last slide. You're fine.
Yeah. And for our study, the protest policy in Isan is like is a conflict that expose the systemic failure of executive governance in Thailand, from the local to the state levels. And we can say that environmental peace building can address these conflicts and also create the new conversations how we can go through these conflicts. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much. And thanks everyone for these excellent presentations. We have a bit of time for discussion, and I think maybe to start us off, I will pick up on a thread that Jirajade and Simon were just mentioning, which is this question of legal reform. All of your presentations at some point mentioned what the laws are, the governance framework, what's already existing, and in many cases is falling short. So I'd be curious to hear more from anyone about legal mechanisms that should be strengthened, mechanisms that are missing, sort of what are actions that you would like to see taken in sort of the legal sphere to improve some of the oversight issues that were mentioned. And I will leave that open to anyone who wants to jump in.
I will take your question, Susan.
Sure.
And maybe I will say in the case of Argentina, I was explaining about RIGI, this investment policy that the government is promoting. And actually, they are promoting a new one, like a new version this year to try to attract more investment, reducing even the tax for foreign investor. So, well, this kind of policy just lack totally sustainable development view. So that is something that they should put there in the rule, because it's not just development, but we are trying to achieve. And yeah, I think we are very, very concerned about the economic issue, that we should try to see a sustainable development and at the same time trying to comply with human rights policies that are like foundational in our framework.
Great. Thanks, Antonella.
Um,
Mattia?
Yeah, if I may add, on my side, like I showed in my presentation, the legal framework actually is there. The issue is that it's not really respected or implemented in the case of indigenous rights. So the issue on this side would be to bring more attention on respecting these obligations, even if they concern maybe a minority that we forget about, because all we think about now is economic development, competitiveness, and maybe, the climate crisis can become global and then it goes viral, but indigenous rights a little bit less. And that's why then we have rulings, but they are not respected. Then, of course, there can be improvements, especially in these cases, like I said, free, prior, and informed consent and veto rights would be ideal. But we already have in these European cases a strong legal framework, but then they just forget about it.
Yeah, that seems to happen. And picking up on that point about indigenous rights, you also talked in your presentation about this element of intersectionality with rights of the child as well. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about that particularly unique context.
Sure. I mean, my research was really institutional, very legal. So for me, it was important to bring this side of intersectionality within it, because it is important when we talk about rights to take into consideration this aspect that many people are affected multiple times by discrimination. And in this case, in the latest case, it was really striking because the Committee on the Rights of the Child characterized the case as a case of intersection discrimination, because these young Sami sisters from a reindeer herding family were affected more because of their indigenous background, but because also of their age and cultural marginalization. And so what is interesting in this case is to go beyond the impacts of extraction understood only in terms of land or environmental harm, which is also essential. It is an essential aspect of it. But then we have to look at this aspect as well and understand that the costs of this green transition are not experienced uniformly, So different groups within indigenous communities may experience resource extraction differently. And that's why in many cases, in many resistance movements, they are also at the forefront, like youth and women indigenous were at the forefront of this resistance and this legal mobilization. So I think this is essential when we have a discussion about participation and representation in extractive governance.
Great, yeah, and I think a lot of overlap there with when we see some of the climate cases that are coming out that are often brought by children and the populations that are most harmed by a lot of these practices.
Yeah.
I'll direct this next question initially to Paige and Alexandra, but then happy to open it up to other thoughts as well. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about, looking at projects and deciding whether the project itself is causing conflict, if it's entering an already fragile conflict and escalating tensions, sort of how to think about evaluating such a complex context as what exactly is the conflict, what's driving it, and what is being affected by the mining.
That's a really good question. Thank you, Susannah. So basically, we can go back to the recommendations in terms of good ESG practice. That one will be, good due diligence at the beginning of the projects. We know that within those due diligence processes, sometimes the social component it's lightly touched or overseen. Sometimes becomes a tick box exercise, or it's not done by somebody that is local. Often banks that are funding or lenders have very tight deadlines for these kind of projects. And so, very short, very small consultation that it's perhaps not representative of the population that could be potentially impacted. All of those things undermine the understanding of the project if the project is being implemented in a context of conflict, and if not, what would be those potential triggers that will come with the project implementation and that could escalate. So the second recommendation is moving further than due diligence. It will be a good baseline and evidence-based. So Paige and I have been working in the last 20 years to understand how data can provide some answers. Good baseline data can provide the understanding of where are the weaknesses of the project, where are the fragilities, where is the community the most fragile, where do they come from, and what are their expectations. So if we try to put the people in the center of the project and then from there understand impacts and risks, and then try to see this holistically, we will actually get to a good baseline to understand that context. But just to finish it off, in the project that is already set in a setting where there's conflict, very fragile peace, like certain countries in Africa where it's an ongoing civil unrest, implementing really strong ESG and human rights policies is extremely difficult. Corruption makes this very difficult. And also we have other type of issues that relate to armed conflicts. And we can see it in Cabo Delgado with, operations and projects fully, stopped and for many years. And then you wonder, was this an already fragile context that was not understood? And the project continued and it was developed under the omission of these drivers, or was there an attempt to actually implement the project, but the actual context was, greater and far more difficult to overcome for a project that, it became, a situation where that project is at right now, which is full stop. So I think it is a combination of both, and I'll finish it off by saying that again, the international framework, it's not right now supporting enough the understanding of what are those conflict contexts.
Thanks, Alexandra. And that's a good lead into our next question. There was a comment that there's a common theme coming across in these presentations about a lack of political will. So the prioritization of economic growth for governments over community needs, indigenous rights, conflict sensitivity. Can any of you share positive signals, steps, examples in your respective context that might offer strategies on how to increase political will? And I'll open that sort of generally for anyone that wants to jump in.
Yeah, I want to share the case in Thailand because in Thailand we face a lot with the slap case, which means that when community they try to present the evidence or try to ask for their rights, the company trying to like fight back, and but this kind of the situation is make a society questions and ask what the justice on environmentals and also raise awareness about the environmental justice that affect everyone in the country or in the regions.
Yeah, Simon, please jump in.
Yeah, maybe just to add to what Maprang has said. So depends a bit on your definition of conflict, and I was also a bit hesitant on the legal side because to me, laws and legal aspects of things are oftentimes just part of politics to me as a political scientist. So oftentimes how I see the case in Thailand is very much a conflict of core periphery. So you have a very centralized government, very Bangkok based, and then oftentimes resource extraction is happening in the periphery, which in our case is Isan. And for a long time, this has not really been considered a region where local resistance would have been taken seriously. And vice versa, oftentimes resource extraction has been then framed as advantageous for that region. So bringing development, but oftentimes the benefits economically were still reaped elsewhere. However, politically now the past years, there have been particularly one opposition party has been campaigning on more economic opportunities that are also based on more participation in Isan and other regions that are not as centralized as other regions are and not in the focus so much. They haven't made it into government yet, but there are attempts also from political parties to center these periphery perspectives much more. And they also gained traction in voter shares in the past year. So that might be a slight sign of hope as well.
Great. Always good to have hopeful signs. Any other positive examples or steps or thoughts about increasing political will?
Sorry, Susannah, can you please repeat that again? I couldn't hear you.
Yep. Just following up on the same question of any other examples of increasing political will or some of the strategies that might help with what seems to be a pretty large barrier for a lot of these situations.
Well, I think maybe just to add on the positive side, there's multiple projects that, although they take a long time to respond, they do take the necessary steps to apply mitigation plans. Perhaps wait a government change. Sometimes you have to allow time for the wounds to heal a little bit, and sometimes it takes companies or projects led by government the decision to change management as well. That could also change the direction where the actual project is heading. So I think those are really good measures, but they do require time, and sometimes time is not what people has at hand, or that hinders potential investments. But I have seen projects that have changed management, changed people on the ground that were actually not allowing the project to move forward towards the right direction and compliance and good practice. And you can see the shift. You can see the actual response from people when they feel they're heard and their concerns truly understood. It actually allows the project to move on a little bit more. I hope it also contributes.
Thanks, Alexandra. Recognizing we just have a few minutes left, maybe I'll just go around and ask everyone to give some closing thoughts. And I think it would be particularly helpful to think about how to situate your specific case studies that you've talked about in sort of the broader landscape of resource extraction. Sort of what's a key point that you want to highlight for your context that you think is applicable to the problems that are obviously being faced around the world. So maybe we'll start in reverse order with Jirajade and Simon.
For me, in Thailand, mostly we talk about the conflict and how we solve that. But when I touch with the environmental peace building, it's like give me like a why uh like the concepts to how can we turn the the resource as a peace building. So this is quite new in Thai context, but I will uh keep to working on that with the communities.
Thanks. Simon, anything you want to add on?
Yeah, I think it came across from all cases that there are, as you said, similarities in resource extraction, and the mechanisms, I think, depends a bit on your governance style, again, having that political science lens on. But I think oftentimes that doesn't matter how small resistance and community building is, it always changes something on the micro level. And if it's only to, give hope to communities affected, but oftentimes it also can cause bigger backlash. I mean, it's not resource extraction related, but we see these protests in Albania now that are gaining traction. And I think oftentimes it can lead to something that is not necessarily envisioned in the beginning. But if you start by building small protest camps, I think that can definitely lead up to bigger change, even though sometimes perspective doesn't seem to suggest that to be the case.
Thanks, Simon. Antonella, what should be our takeaway from the Argentine context?
Well, I think like last year, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights advisor opinion was a huge win for communities because this decision is in some way mandatory for Argentina. But surprisingly, some state courts in Argentina took that decision and they put it in place. And so that is why the Jujuy Supreme Court just decided that communities need a prior informed consent, and they need to give that prior informed consent for the development of some projects in their land. So I think like at that point, these international organizations and like the Inter-American Court of Human Rights played a huge role in countries. And so I think that is an important point. And also that I found some connection with Mattia in this idea of contradictory idea about the energy transition between like this, we are talking about energy transition by developing lithium batteries, but at the same time, the development of the mining of that lithium is creating some environmental issues. So it's very contradictory. So I just put that things to think about.
Yeah, great to make those connections. Mattia, what about you?
Well, I think these situations are really similar. I think we are seeing a shift in priorities. Like I said, we're moving from looking at rights and looking at real sustainable transition to more economic interest, competitiveness. But building on also on what Simon was saying, I think we need this community building, these alliances. I also noticed it in my research, like it can be indigenous communities, but they need the backup of youth organizations, environmental organizations, everybody that can help in building a better future. And this is exactly what we're doing right now, also from different parts of the world. And I think that brings hope, and that brings also change in some ways. Also, because also let it be for reputational risks. Good, it's still a change, and it is made by these alliances. So that's what I hope to see also in the future.
Thanks, Mattia. And to close us out, Paige and Alexandra.
Thanks so much. I do apologize for Paige who's having connectivity issues, but I think I will agree with my colleagues here. I spoke about this framework, starting in the international, the global sphere, and then it goes all the way down to the country level frameworks. And what I take away is that the critical minerals projects and the just transition requires this, international effort. And we need to engage a lot more. The dialogue needs to be from the global to the national and the local communities. We need to start speaking the same language. And I think it's more often that we find that we have conflict related to projects, even infrastructure projects or renewables. We are heading towards, shortage of resources, and this is not going to get better. But I think being a little bit negative, but being positive, if we try to have the right frameworks that can make everyone accountable for whatever part they have to take. Then in the projects, we definitely need this minerals, but we need to fully understand what conflict means, and we need to start training a lot more, providing a lot more capacity building to our communities, professionals, decision makers, because with training and more opportunities of dialogue, Antonella was talking about free, prior, and informed consent, and the principles of ethics are actually fantastic throughout, even in personal life. So definitely, we need to start putting our humanity a lot more into these frameworks. But the economic drive and the unfortunate war that we are seeing and experiencing this year, I think we are also, in the need of a lot more strength, and environmental peace building could bring, a lot of more of that narrative in terms of like, let's put peace first. So definitely that will be my final remark. Thank you.
Great. It's a great note to end on. Once again, I just want to thank all of our speakers, Alexandra, Paige, Mattia, Antonella, Jirajade, and Simon, for such an engaging discussion, and Mara for handling all of our tech. As mentioned, this webinar will be available on the Impacts Conference YouTube channel. So thank you all for joining, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks very much for great moderation.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Have a
That's
great
really
day.
good. Thank you.